There is an HOA crisis happening right now in Florida and all over America. Did you know that 45% of Florida homeowners are in an HOA? That's nearly half the state's homeowners. But what happens when these HOA costs suddenly skyrocket to $2,000 per month? Today, we're exploring how this HOA crisis is pushing Florida toward a potential housing crash in 2024, as homeowners are being forced to sell their houses or their condos in an extreme situation because they can no longer afford the payment. Imagine waking up to find your HOA fees have suddenly jumped to $2,000 a month. For many Floridians, this nightmare is becoming a reality. With nearly half of the state's homeowners in HOAs, the impact is widespread and severe. Families are facing impossible choices: pay skyrocketing fees or sell their homes. This crisis isn't just about individual homeowners, it's setting the stage for a potential housing market crash in 2024. As more people are forced to sell, we're seeing a surge in inventory that could send prices tumbling. But why is this happening? What's behind these dramatic fee increases? And could this crisis spread beyond Florida's borders? To understand the root of this crisis, we need to look at a recent decision made by Florida's government. In May 2022, Governor Ron DeSantis signed a new law that's sending shockwaves through the state's housing market. This legislation mandates that all condo associations in Florida must have fully funded reserves by 2025. On the surface, it sounds like a responsible move, right? But as we'll see, good intentions don't always lead to good outcomes. So what exactly are these fully funded reserves? Think of them as a savings account for big repairs and maintenance. The law requires condo associations to set aside money for future expenses like roof replacements, structural repairs, or other major renovations. It's meant to prevent situations where a building falls into disrepair because there's no money set aside for upkeep. The rationale behind this law is rooted in tragedy. Remember the horrific Surfside condo collapse in 2021? That disaster claimed 98 lives and exposed a dangerous pattern of neglect in building maintenance across Florida. Many condo associations had been kicking the can down the road, avoiding necessary repairs to keep monthly fees low. This new law aims to prevent future tragedies by ensuring buildings are properly maintained. But here's where good intentions collide with harsh reality. For decades, many Florida condo associations have underfunded their reserves. Now they're faced with the daunting task of making up for years of financial neglect in a short time. And guess who's footing the bill? That's right, the homeowners. The result? Sudden and steep increases in HOA assessments. We're not talking about a few extra dollars a month. In some cases, fees have skyrocketed from $500 to $2,000 per month. Imagine your housing costs quadrupling overnight. For many Floridians, this isn't a hypothetical scenario, it's their new reality. One homeowner summed up the situation perfectly. If you're a current condo owner, you're going to get a bill potentially for the last 20 years of maintenance costs for the last 20 years of reserves. It's like being handed a 2-decade bill all at once. How many of us could absorb that kind of financial shock? This law is affecting communities across Florida in different ways. In some areas, we're seeing mass sell-offs as homeowners simply can't afford the new fees. In others, condo boards are scrambling to find ways to comply with the law without bankrupting their residents. Some associations are exploring loans to spread out the cost, while others are considering special assessments, one-time fees that can run into tens of thousands of dollars per unit. The impact isn't limited to older buildings either. Even relatively new condos are facing challenges. A building constructed just 15 years ago might still need significant reserves for future repairs. And let's not forget about the snowball effect. As more people sell their condos, property values in these communities may start to decline, making it even harder for remaining owners to afford the increased fees. But it's not just about the money. The crisis is reshaping communities. Longtime residents, many of them retirees on fixed incomes, are being forced out of homes they've lived in for years. Neighborhoods are changing as investors swoop in to buy properties at reduced prices from desperate sellers. Have you ever had to choose between your home and your financial stability? That's the impossible decision many Floridians are facing right now. It's a stark reminder of how policy decisions, even well-intentioned ones, can have far-reaching and sometimes devastating consequences. You might think Florida's HOA crisis is an isolated incident, but it's actually part of a much larger trend sweeping across America. Have you ever wondered just how many people are affected by HOAs nationwide? The numbers are staggering. Approximately 30 million housing units in the U.S. are part of a homeowners association. That's about 1 in every 4 or 5 homes across the country. But it's not just about the numbers, it's about the changing landscape of American home ownership. Florida's 45% HOA rate might seem high, but it's not alone. In Colorado, 40% of homes are in HOAs, while California isn't far behind at 35%. This widespread involvement means that what's happening in Florida could be a glimpse into the future for many other states. Now, you might be thinking, why are HOAs so prevalent? Well, it's not by accident. Builders have played a significant role in this trend. Would you believe that 66% of all new build homes are now constructed within an HOA? And for large developments by major builders, that figure jumps to over 80%. It's becoming the norm rather than the exception. But here's where it gets interesting. Despite their prevalence, HOAs are facing a serious image problem. A recent poll revealed that 75% of respondents would not consider buying a home in an HOA. That's 3 out of every 4 people saying no thanks to HOA living. It's a stark contrast to the building trends we're seeing. So why are builders so keen on HOAs? It's simple. They believe that HOAs help maintain property values and manage community aspects. It's a way of ensuring that the neighborhoods they build remain attractive long after they've sold the last house. Plus, it relieves local governments of some responsibilities. It's a win-win for builders and local authorities, but what about the homeowners? This is where the Florida crisis becomes particularly relevant. As one expert put it, the way this happens is that the home builders typically build in HOAs today. Then they think the HOA is going to help the sale value of the houses. But what happens when those HOA costs spiral out of control? We're seeing the answer play out in real time in Florida. And it's not just about the financial burden. There's a darker side to HOAs that's causing concern. As another expert warned, more and more we're seeing horror stories across America of people who buy a house in an HOA. The HOA can foreclose and kick you out of the house. It's a sobering reminder of the power these associations wield over homeowners. This widespread HOA involvement across the country makes Florida's crisis a potential red flag for other states. If HOA costs can skyrocket in Florida due to new regulations, what's to stop similar situations from unfolding elsewhere? It's a question that should be on every homeowner's mind, whether they're in an HOA or not. Have you ever heard the phrase, when it rains, it pours? Well, in Florida's housing market, it's not just raining, it's a perfect storm. We've already discussed the HOA crisis sweeping across the Sunshine State, but that's just one part of a much larger, more complex problem. Imagine you're a Florida homeowner. You've just been hit with a massive increase in your HOA fees. But wait, there's more. Your insurance rates are skyrocketing too. And just when you think it can't get any worse, you look at mortgage rates and realize they've nearly doubled in the past 2 years. This isn't a hypothetical scenario. It's the harsh reality facing many Floridians right now. Let's break this down piece by piece. We've already covered the HOA crisis, so let's turn our attention to insurance rates. Florida has always been a challenging market for insurers due to its vulnerability to hurricanes and other natural disasters. But in recent years, the situation has become dire. Many major insurance companies have pulled out of the state entirely, leaving homeowners with fewer options and higher premiums. Now, add this to the dramatic spike in mortgage rates over the last 2 years. Remember when 30-year fixed rates were hovering around 3%? Those days are long gone. Today, rates are closer to 6%, and they've been even higher. This dramatic increase has had a chilling effect on the housing market. How bad is it? Let's look at the numbers. Mortgage applications have plummeted, showing a staggering 133% decrease from last year. But it gets worse. Compared to pre-pandemic levels, we're seeing a 50% drop in applications. These aren't just statistics. They represent thousands of families who can no longer afford to buy a home or refinance their existing mortgage. You might be thinking, but haven't mortgage rates come down a bit recently? You're right, they have, but here's the kicker. Even with these slight decreases, we're not seeing a corresponding increase in buyer demand. The market isn't responding positively to lower rates. It's as if potential buyers have simply given up. The Mortgage Bankers Association reports that the mortgage application index is now at a level of 132. To put that into perspective, that's lower than during the 2008 housing crisis. It's a clear indication that buyer interest has hit rock bottom. So what does all this mean for the average Floridian? It means that homeowners are caught in a vice. On one side, they're being squeezed by rising HOA fees and insurance costs. On the other, they're trapped by high mortgage rates that make it difficult or impossible to sell and move somewhere more affordable. Before we move on, thank you for watching, liking, and sharing our videos. And if you like this content, please take a second to subscribe so you don't miss these regular updates. For potential buyers, the situation is equally grim. Even if they can find a home they like, the combination of high purchase prices, steep insurance rates, and daunting mortgage rates make homeownership feel like an impossible dream. One industry expert summed it up bluntly: buyer demand is literally in the gutter. It's a stark assessment, but one that's backed up by the data we're seeing. This perfect storm of factors is creating a uniquely challenging environment for Florida's housing market. It's not just about individual components like HOA fees or mortgage rates. It's about how these factors are converging and amplifying each other's effects. Remember when we talked about the perfect storm brewing in Florida's housing market? Well, now we're starting to see the clouds gather and the wind pick up. The signs of a potential housing crash are becoming impossible to ignore, and they're painting a worrying picture for Florida's real estate future. Let's start with something that might surprise you. Florida's housing inventory is surging. Now, you might be thinking, isn't more inventory a good thing? Well, not always. In a healthy market, sure, but when inventory spikes suddenly, it often signals trouble ahead. Take Clearwater, for example. This popular coastal city has seen a dramatic increase in home listings over the past 2 years. It's not just a few extra houses here and there. We're talking about a significant jump. And Clearwater isn't alone. Across Florida, inventory levels are climbing back to pre-pandemic levels. In some areas, we're seeing the highest inventory in a decade. But why is this happening? Remember those skyrocketing HOA fees we talked about earlier? They're playing a big role. As homeowners face sudden, massive increases in their monthly costs, many are finding themselves with no choice but to sell. It's a harsh reality. Sell now or risk foreclosure later. Now, here's where it gets even more concerning. It's not just that more homes are hitting the market, it's also about how they're being priced. Florida is currently experiencing its highest rate of price cuts in 7 to 8 years. Let that sink in for a moment. Sellers aren't just listing their homes, they're increasingly dropping their asking prices to attract buyers. Why are sellers becoming more willing to lower their prices? It's simply supply and demand. As inventory rises, sellers face more competition. They're realizing that if they want to sell in this market, they need to be realistic about pricing. It's a buyer's market in the making, but here's the catch: there aren't enough buyers. Remember the mortgage rate spike we discussed? It's still keeping many potential buyers on the sidelines. So we have this situation where more homes are for sale, prices are starting to drop, but buyer demand remains low. It's a recipe for a market downturn. But let's connect the dots back to our HOA crisis. These surging inventories and price cuts aren't happening in a vacuum. They're direct consequences of the financial pressure homeowners are facing. When HOA fees suddenly jump from $500 to $2,000 a month, it doesn't just strain budgets, it breaks them. For many, selling isn't a choice, it's a necessity. Here's a sobering quote from a real estate expert. The number of listings is now back to pre-pandemic levels, and many other parts of Florida where I am right now, the inventory has gone up so much that we're at the highest level in a decade. This isn't just a blip on the radar, it's a significant shift in the market. Now, you might be wondering, does this mean we're definitely heading for a crash? Well, it's not that simple. Markets are complex and predictions are never certain. But what we can say is this: the combination of skyrocketing HOA costs, increased inventory levels, and a high rate of price cuts typically precedes a market downturn. These are warning signs that we can't afford to ignore. Think about it this way. If you're a homeowner in Florida right now, you're facing higher HOA fees, possibly higher insurance costs, and the knowledge that if you need to sell, you'll be competing with a flood of other listings. If you're a potential buyer, you might be seeing more options and some price cuts, but you're also dealing with higher mortgage rates and the uncertainty of buying into an HOA that could hit you with massive fee increases. Have you ever considered how a crisis in one sector can ripple through an entire economy? The HOA situation in Florida isn't just about home values or individual finances. It's a potential catalyst for widespread economic change. Let's explore how this crisis could reshape not just Florida, but the American housing landscape as a whole. First, let's think about local economies. Florida's economy is heavily dependent on real estate and construction. As HOA costs force more homeowners to sell, we're seeing a dramatic shift in the housing market. But what happens when a significant portion of a community suddenly can't afford to stay in their homes? It's not just about empty houses, it's about empty storefronts, reduced local tax revenue, and a potential exodus of residents. Consider this: when homeowners are forced to sell due to rising HOA fees, it doesn't just affect their personal finances. It can destabilize entire communities. Longtime residents move out, social bonds are broken, and the character of neighborhoods can change almost overnight. It's not just a Florida problem, it's a potential preview of what could happen in other states with high HOA involvement. But the ripple effect goes even further. Think about the job market. As the real estate sector struggles, we could see job losses in construction, property management, and related industries. Real estate agents, mortgage brokers, home inspectors, all these professions could feel the pinch. And as the workers lose income or leave the area, it further depresses local economies. Now let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture. Florida's HOA crisis could be the canary in the coal mine for other states. Remember, 40% of homes in Colorado are in HOAs and 35% in California. If similar regulations or financial pressures hit these states, we could see a domino effect across the country. This crisis is also changing how people perceive HOAs. Once seen as a way to maintain property values and community standards, HOAs are increasingly viewed as financial liabilities. This shift in perception could have long-lasting effects on how homes are built and sold across America. Consider this quote from an industry expert: "This is something that has the potential to cause a massive housing collapse in different parts of America, as well as potentially completely reshape how Americans buy their homes." It's a stark warning about the far-reaching implications of this crisis. But it's not just about the negative impacts. The situation is forcing us to rethink some fundamental aspects of home ownership and community governance. As one expert pointed out, we're seeing a staggering 500% spike in liquidations due to the HOA crisis. This isn't just a statistic. It represents thousands of families being forced to make difficult decisions about their homes and futures. This crisis could lead to significant changes in how we approach housing development and community management. We might see a shift away from HOA-governed communities, or perhaps a move towards more transparent and financially sustainable HOA models. Either way, the landscape of American suburbia could look very different in the coming years. There's also the question of how this crisis might influence future home buying and building trends. Will we see a return to non-HOA neighborhoods, or will developers find new ways to make HOA living more attractive and financially stable? These are questions that could shape the future of American housing for decades to come. It's important to remember that crises often lead to innovation. While the current situation is undoubtedly challenging for many homeowners, it could also spur new approaches to community governance and property management. We might see the rise of more democratic, transparent HOA structures, or the development of new financial models to handle long-term maintenance costs. So what does all this mean for you? Whether you're a current homeowner in an HOA, a potential buyer, or someone considering a move to Florida, this crisis demands your attention. For homeowners, it's crucial to stay informed about your HOA's financial health and upcoming assessments. If you're facing steep increases, consider exploring legal options or community organizing to challenge unreasonable hikes. Potential buyers, do your homework, research local market conditions, and use tools like the Home Price Forecast Score for your area. This crisis could reshape the American housing landscape, potentially signaling the end of HOAs as we know them. What's your experience with HOAs? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for being here, and watch this one next.